Welcome friends to the new session where we are going to talk about a new theoretical framework in international relations, and that is known as feminism. Feminism is actually a reflectivist approach in IR. Some people call it's a post-positivist approach, or some even call it simply a new theory in IR. But basically, feminist scholarship has been resisted by academic gatekeepers. And as we go through the literature in IR, we see that it has been a very partial and gendered nature of intellectual work, which is built basically on men's experiences. And in international relations scholarship, we never considered gender relations as a necessary part of our analysis, because world politics was always characterized in terms of conflict, competition, security, and that too security basically defined in terms of military security and power, or the threat of use of power, and that too coercive power, drawing on a particular notion of human nature that was very gendered. So that was the kind of bias, which was always there in international relation scholarship. And therefore, a very prominent feminist scholar, Cynthia Enlow, asked a very pertinent question: where are the women? So the answer is very significant because it tries to hit at the very base, of the anomaly which is there in the scholarship of international relations, whereby women are totally absent. Some people might try to answer this question that there have been women of significance in the international political arena. They give the example of Golda Meir, of Indira Gandhi, of Margaret Thatcher. But this has led to the assertion that women are rarely in power, and if they are ever there, they behave like men. And therefore, these people, these ladies like Indira Gandhi and Margaret Thatcher were famous, and they are known because they had those manly qualities. Margaret Thatcher was very famously known to be the only man in her cabinet, because the other men who actually were men were behaving like women, and she was behaving like a man. So therefore, the idea is that even if a woman has to be successful, or she was ever successful in the political arena, she was successful because she acted like men. Even in India, we have Razia Sultan, we have Rani Lakshmi Bai, and they are all extolled for their manly virtues. Similarly, if men in international political arena, or even in the national political arena, if they appear to be compassionate, or they seek to negotiate to avoid a conflict, they are accused of being women or wimps. So that is the kind of patriarchal mindset which conditions our thinking in the actual political arena. However, gender has gradually acquired an important role with the passage of time in IR. Although the first widely acknowledged works in feminism only appeared around the 1980s, much later than many other social science disciplines. But gender has now streamlined into international organizations as a policy priority, with women assuming key roles in daily affairs of states and organizations. Still, if you look at the global scenario, even in the Western world, their representation is much below the desirable levels. So if you look at the Senate in America, or representative bodies in most other countries, or at the level of heads of state, heads of government, you would find the representation of women as being few and far between. So therefore, despite the changes which have come in, as you go at the top level, slowly and gradually you would find that the number of women's increasingly gets less and less. So the higher you go, the less number of women you find in positions of power and positions where they would be taking significant decisions as regards states or organizations. However, despite the growing importance of feminism in international relations, uh, it is still occupies less space as compared to other theoretical frameworks like realism, liberalism, or even constructivism. There are varying strands of thought within feminism, but there are a few elements which cut across most feminist approaches. And they are: number one, feminism has strongly contributed to the affirming of the centrality of the social in IR. This is in contradiction to the more rationalist approaches, which do not emphasize that much on the social as far as the international relations is concerned. It starts at the level of the individual, and that individual is embedded in historical, social, political, even economic structures. So, how that individual, because of the gendered relations in the society, negotiates all these structures, that is something which all feminists are trying to address. The other important thing is that feminism has made important methodological contributions, like it has tried to understand this very complex phenomena, whereby the discipline is so very gendered, so therefore they have incorporated methods which are common in other disciplines like ethnography. They have all been used, and many other such methods have been used to try to understand, how gender relations operate in the society and how they are heavily weighed in favor of the men at the cost of the women. Thirdly, it has also reinforced the normative credo, because feminism is clearly normative and emancipatory. It tries to transform international politics and emancipate women from the fetters which have been artificially created in their way to going ahead and occupying positions of influence and power in the arena of international politics. As far as the feminist perspective is concerned, it makes some very strategic claims. The first claim is that the women experiences are systematically different from those of men. Even from men of their own family or of their own ethnic group or even of their own class. The next one is that all social relations are gendered. So we experience our class or race in gendered forms. We do not experience our gender alone or in isolation from other social identities. And gender is constitutive of other social relations. This shows us that representation of social relations, including in global politics, that apparently are gender neutral, are in actuality not. They in reality universalize men's experience and their knowledge. So therefore, in the arena of international politics, even if certain things are there which claim to be gender neutral, they actually are not. Because it is basically the dominant, overpowering patriarchy which actually is there to commonalize and universalize the experiences of the menfolk. And therefore, all knowledge which is created in the international political arena comes or is created from that particular perspective. Despite these commonalities, there are certain different forms and shapes that feminism can assume, and these are as follows. The first important strand of thought in feminism is known as liberal feminism. This was the first, rather, kind of thinking which originated in the arena of feminism. And here they focus on gender as an explanatory variable. And they look at the roles women play in world politics and ask why they are marginalized. And actually, they claim the same opportunities offered to women as men. So their claim is that there is no difference, men and women are the same. So they can perform the same kind of functions. So if men can go in combat roles in the armed forces, it is women who can also go there. The only issue is that they have never been given that chance, and we never thought that women could take combat roles, and that's the reason we never gave them. And it is a consequence of such kinds of mindset that today we find that in most of the armies of the world, you find a considerable representation of women even in combat roles. So that is being done, or that was being argued to prove that there was no basic functional difference as far as men and women were concerned. The only difference was in the availability of opportunities. So if the same opportunities are available to women, they would be able to do equally good or sometimes even better than men. The other category of feminists are known as cultural feminists. These people include those who see women as different from men. And they argue that women are more nurturing, more peaceable. They, however, do not reject, rather, the claims or the values which women hold dear, as liberals would do, very clearly. So they say that women would have their own values and they should not be apologetic about those. And rather they say that it is these very values which women have that the world today needs. Although they are often accused of being essentialists because of that. But basically what they are saying is that today the world is riven with wars, with violence, with all kinds of, misuse of power, and that is because the world is today governed by the values of men, which is aggression, violence, coercion. But what the world today needs is more of compassion, more of understanding, more of empathy, more of peace. And these are the values, which are basically essential to women. And therefore, the cultural feminists argue that if women were to be at the helm of affairs in the world of today, the world would be a much better place to live. So they have got a totally different perspective from the liberal feminists. The liberal feminists were trying to argue that men and women are the same, but the cultural feminists are arguing that men and women are different, and women should not be rather apologetic about that. They should be proud of that because they have some unique qualities different from men, and international political arena today needs those very values and qualities. They are often criticized for reinforcing the gendered stereotype that underpin women's oppression. But they say that there are certain qualities of women which even men need to emulate. And whatever functions women are performing in the world today which are taken as natural to them, like nurturing children, they say that they are all learned skills, Women have learned those skills generation after generation, and then they are doing it. And since they are doing it, we think that they are values essential to women. But they say that men can also do nurturing. If they learn those things, they could be equally good at that. So therefore, there are certain values which are considered to be women values. They could even be learned. They are skills which can be learned, and men could even go for learning these skills. Then come the standpoint feminists. These feminists want to correct the male dominance of the knowledge of the world. They say that the knowledge in this world is, has been created from a certain male dominant perspective. So we need to create a new body of knowledge, which is rather taking into account the women perspective also. And if we create this kind of a knowledge, that would be more equal, more just. And Tickner, who is a very famous feminist scholar, does this by describing the 6 objective principles of international politics, which were developed by Morgenthau, which were very famous principles of political realism. And she has given a female version of that reality. And it is something, which we come to later in this discussion, whereby we will be discussing the new form which has been given to these 6 so-called objective principles of international politics by Ann Tickner. So therefore, we would come across a new version of reality from what the standpoint feminists would rather come up with as far as their works in the field of feminism and IR is concerned. Next, we have the Marxist or socialist feminists. The Marxist feminists see the oppression of women as a byproduct of capitalism, because Marxian perspective always looks at things from the perspective of class. So therefore, their argument is that whatever oppression of women happens, it is because of this, nature of international politics, whereby the capitalists are exploiting the proletariat class, and therefore any oppression, any subjugation of women happens because of this, the class nature of politics, which is there at the international level. Whereas the socialist feminists ones are those who see the operation of women as a consequence of both capitalism and patriarchy. So they are talking about capitalism, but they are also talking of patriarchy, and they say that the structures which have created these instruments of exploitation of capitalism and patriarchy, they need to be removed if we want to have some chance of equality in the international political arena and in international relations. So that is something, which needs to be changed to create a more equal discourse in international relations. Another category of feminist scholars are known as postmodernist feminists, and they are basically concerned with gender as opposed to the position of women in society as such. So their basic concern is gender and not only women and their condition in the society. And they inquire into the ways in which masculinity and femininity are constructed, and are mainly interested in how world politics constructs certain types of men and women. So these scholars are basically trying to study, these constructions, and how these constructions would help us to understand better how, international politics works to the disadvantage of the feminine gender. Another category of feminists are known as constructive feminists. And these constructive feminists, highlight the role gender plays in shaping and consequently being shaped by global politics. And they emphasize upon the importance of changing the norms which define gender relations. So how these norms are constructed, which define these relations, and which eventually ensure that when these norms are operationalized, it is the feminine gender which is always at a disadvantage, or the masculine gender, whatever advantages it is having, it is at the cost of the feminine gender. So that is what the construction of norms or the manner of the construction of norms is something which rather intrigues the constructive feminists scholars. After this, there is another category of scholars among feminists who are known as post-structuralists. The post-structuralists adopt a language-based approach focusing on how and why gender-based dichotomized linguistic constructions such as strong versus weak, rational versus emotional, and public versus private serve to empower masculinities and devalorize femininities. So that is, very important because we know that across time, that is the kind of construct which has been created, that if you are talking about masculine qualities, you are talking only about strength, And if you are talking about feminine qualities, you are talking about weakness. So men are supposed to be rational creatures, and rational creatures are those who use their intellectual faculties. So men have more intellect, they are intellectually better. But whereas when you are talking about women, you are talking about emotions, So women are emotional. So not only we are saying that women are emotional, but emotionalism is also viewed as a weak quality. So if somebody is emotional, you are weak. So emotionalism is a weak quality, and that is associated with the feminine gender. So that is the kind of construction, which has come into our language, into our thinking, into our discourse, and that informs all our understandings about gender relations. And this is what the post-structuralists are addressing here. In addition to this, there are many other categories, for example, third world feminists. So these are scholars who are from the third world, and then they say that the experience of women across the world is not the same. So women living in the first world would not have the same experience as women living in the third world societies, which are so very backward. Their experiences would be very different. Actually, within the first world also, if somebody is a white woman in America, for example, or a black woman or a Hispanic woman, their experiences would obviously be different. So there are a lot of intersectionalities. So white women versus white men. Of course, white women are at a disadvantage, but within women, the experiences of white women are different from black women, and their experiences are different from Hispanic women and other kinds of women, categories of women living in the same society. And then if you take the women living in the first world as an omnibus category, then women living in the third world would have a different experience. Now, if you take India, for example, that within our own country, all women would not be the same. Rich women would be having a different experience, although they would face discrimination, but of a different kind as compared to women who are poor. But otherwise also, there are a lot of other intersectionalities. For example, women belonging to the upper castes would have certain privileges despite facing certain discriminations as compared to women belonging to the lower castes. Similarly, women belonging to the majority community versus women belonging to the minority community. So the factor of caste, the factor of religion, the factor of region, the factor of language, and many other such major and even apparently minor factors affect the kind of experiences which different categories of women would have. So therefore, we cannot reduce the experiences of women into one broad category of women. We need to look at them differently because different women's or different categories of women would experience different kind of discriminations, and maybe many of these women would not be able to understand or empathize with the experience of women living in their own societies but belonging to a different category, because they live in a different milieu, and therefore they cannot imagine the kind of fears, the kind of apprehensions, the kind of insecurities, the kind of discriminations, the kind of atrocities women in a different category living very close to them physically, geographically, would be facing. So therefore the situation actually is very complex when we come to try to understand what the experiences of women are, and how different categories of women and their experience can be rather understood holistically sometimes, but we also need to dig deeper and go into the intersectionality of the experiences also to have a better understanding. Gender, slowly has to some extent replaced women as the center of feminist research, because the feminist researchers understand that gender is something which is given to women by the society, in which they live. Because we are born as men and women, but that is a biological or a sexual category. But gender is something which the society gives us. So therefore, most feminists would try to understand the reasons behind gender discrimination in IR, both as a discipline but also as a practice. So that is the main challenge which confronts feminists of all hues. So basically, this is the understanding of how feminism in IR has been, after the 1980s, an area of academic discourse and discussion, and how we have different commonalities among all feminist scholars, but there are certain differences because we can divide all the feminist scholars into these different categories which we discussed, so to have a better understanding of how their perspectives and approaches differ from each other. We will discuss the works of some important feminist scholars in the next section. Thank you.